Coming up on Network Africa. Ethiopia suspends 2 aid organizations as the UN aid chief asks for more aid access to Tigray. Sudan takes first step towards joining International Criminal Court. Plus, truck collides with bus in Mali, killing 41 people. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Ethiopia's government has suspended the operations of 2 international aid organizations working in the northern Tigray region affected by a 10-month conflict. Doctors Without Borders, MSF, says activities by its Dutch section had been stopped in Tigray and 3 other regions, while the Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC, said their operations across the country had been affected. The government accuses the aid groups of misinformation, employing foreigners without appropriate work permits. The move comes as the UN aid chief warned that claims of bias against aid workers in Tigray is dangerous.
To his key ministers.
The United Nations new humanitarian chief denounces accusations by Ethiopian government officials that aid workers are biased in favor of rebels in Tigray, where a brutal conflict between federal troops and forces loyal to the northern region's rulers erupted 9 months ago.
They are urgent, they are important.
Speaking to reporters at the end of a 6-day visit to Ethiopia, Martin Griffiths also called for access to allow desperately needed aid into the mountainous region where the UN says hundreds of thousands of people are suffering from famine.
It's a calculated need, 100 trucks a day. To make this work, we need to change the circumstances that have seen trucks moving in rather slowly. We need assured access routes by land, as well as, of course, our own flights going in and out of Mekelle. From a wide range of meetings with women's groups, internally displaced people, teachers, local community, health workers, that the needs that have been spoken about in Tigray are indeed what they have been advertised as. They are huge, they are urgent, they are important.
At least a dozen aid workers have been killed since the government sent troops into Tigray in November to remove the leaders of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which for decades dominated national politics until Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018. They include 3 staff with Doctors Without Borders who were killed in June, prompting the international medical charity to suspend operations in parts of the region. Aid workers have complained that even though Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared a unilateral humanitarian ceasefire, aid access into Tigray is as bad as ever, hobbled by insecurity and bureaucratic hurdles. The Ethiopian government claims both MSF and NRC have been disseminating misinformation on social media and other platforms outside of the mandate and purpose for which the organizations were permitted to operate. Meanwhile, residents of a Sudanese border town have reported seeing bodies bearing gunshot wounds or with their hands bound floating down a river that runs from Tigray.
And in neighboring Sudan, the transitional cabinet has unanimously approved a bill that would pave way for it to join the International Criminal Court. The draft has been approved in preparation for a joint meeting between the governing Sovereign Council and the cabinet to pass it into law. The development moves Sudan closer to handing over to the ICC suspects wanted for war crimes and genocide in the Western Darfur region, including former President Omar al-Bashir. In May, the ICC concluded a confirmation of charges hearing in the case of Ali Kushaib, who is accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Darfur between 2003 and 2004. Over in South Sudan, a senior general has declared himself the leader of the country's main opposition faction and has called for the ousting of First Vice President Riek Machar. The Chief of Staff of the Sudan's People's Liberation Movement in opposition, SPLM-IO, General Simon Gatwech-Dual, accuses Mr. Machar of going back on the movement's vision. The announcement came after a meeting of generals of the SPLM-IO, which also proposed that General Gatwech take over the position of First Vice President in the Transitional Unity Government. Meanwhile, representatives of the Sudanese government, its security forces and the UN mission in South Sudan have met in Juba to jointly address challenges faced by peacekeepers and humanitarian agencies during efforts to reach people that need protection, food, medical supplies and other urgent assistance. Monthly meetings are now being held by UNMISS and the South Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which both parties say have helped put more focus on their common goals.
Representatives of the Sudanese government, its security forces and the UN mission in South Sudan met in Juba to jointly address challenges faced by peacekeepers and humanitarian agencies during efforts to reach people that need protection, food, medical supplies, and other urgent assistance.
Even if we encounter differences of approach and points of difference in the past, working together with respect for each other's responsibilities will make us stronger.
Monthly meetings are now being held by UNMISS and the South Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which both parties say have helped put more focus to their common goals.
It is very central for trust building and for us to be able to open a new page in how to coordinate our activities between various institutions of security of our country and the United Nations mission in South Sudan.
The need for quick action on a variety of levels by several stakeholders was emphasized last month when thousands were forced to flee for their lives following armed attacks in the western equatorial region. Some of them said they had to walk for over 10 kilometers to seek safety in churches and school compounds in the town of Tambura.
We are, as a force, much more mobile than we've ever been. Our patrols are going out all over the country to protect civilians wherever they may be threatened. And the level of threat has spread throughout the country, and it's necessary for us to have that access.
The country's leaders gave assurances in early July that they would not lead the country back into war as they marked its 10th anniversary.
And away from South Sudan, Zambia's opposition leader, Hakainde Hichilema, says police blocked him from accessing Mbala and Umpulungu towns in the north on Tuesday night. He says he would not leave and was willing to spend the night in his car before proceeding to the towns. Mr. Hichilema, who is challenging President Edgar Lungu in next week's election, said he was asked to produce a permit and was not told which exact permit was required. The candidates in the upcoming polls were directed to hold door-to-door campaigns and not the usual rallies because of the coronavirus pandemic. Large crowds have, however, been spotted in towns where both the opposition and ruling party candidates have visited. Well, Zambian journalist Alexander Musukulu-Twane joins us now from Lusaka for more on this. Thank you so much for your time. What more do we know about what happened with Mr. Hichilema? Was he able to proceed or did he spend the night in his car like he said?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for according me an opportunity to update what is happening in this country, Zambia. And we just have about 8 days before we head to the polls, and the elections will be taking place next week, Thursday, on the 12th of August, 2021. So yes, the main opposition leader, Hakainde Hichilema has been on a campaign trail, just like many other politicians seeking a mandate from Zambian people on why they should be considered for that elective position. So he's been campaigning just last week in related to what has been happening, what happened last night. Last week he was in Eastern Province. A similar matter did happen when he arrived in Chipata. That's the capital town, the provincial capital town of Eastern Province in Zambia. He was stopped just as he descended from his plane to enter Chipata from the gates of that airport. He was stopped that you're not supposed to be here because the police were saying that they were supposed to be notified to ensure that security is provided. Same thing happened yesterday when he was planning to enter Mbulungu. To enter Nakonde, and the police did say that, well, you were supposed to tell us that you are coming so that they plan. And there is already a law in this country, that's the Public Order Act, where the police have to be notified for any political gathering that has to take place. So yes, I did spend some hours just near the border town of Nakonde, where after a number of residents in that particular area now thronged to a place 8 kilometers from the main entrance of Nakonde. And later on in the night, he was allowed and proceeded to undertake campaign activities. Same thing happened when he did attempt to enter another town within the same province, that's Mbala. Same requirements were laid out to him that he was supposed to notify the police so that as prerequisite of the Public Order Act.
You know, from what you're saying, it doesn't seem like candidates are following this directive. You know, they've been told not to hold usual rallies because of the coronavirus. Instead, they've been told to hold door-to-door campaigns. How is that, how is that meant to work out? Or is it working out?
It is working out for some of them. Yes, the campaign rallies, the traditional way of campaigns towards elections has not been the case in Zambia because of the global pandemic of coronavirus. So there were other options that the politicians were told by the Electoral Commission of Zambia side by side with Zambia police that they should seek other alternatives to reach out their message to their would-be supporters in the coming elections. The alternatives among them is door-to-door campaigns. The use of the media. So yes, the use of the media has been a thorny issue, especially with the use of the public broadcaster. That's the state-run Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation, that's ZNBC. There have been complaints from political stakeholders that they're not allowed to be part of the main broadcaster's programming because of different political affiliation. Those are the complaints. Some have even gone as far as to seek the court's interpretation. The other option they were told is door-to-door, where they said that only few people should be knocking on people's doors to spread their political party message. And the other option as well was roadshows. Now, roadshows was only suspended last week, where they said, well, as much as the roadshows were allowed, this is where the reports of violence emanated from. So political parties like the UPND have been using a tagline of distribution of face masks nationwide, which we all know that it is also a campaign theory they want to rely on, considering that the current status. So yes, the political parties have been trying to reach out to various electorates in this country, but it hasn't been as easy as it's supposed to be because of the various restrictions that have been put in place.
And Alexander, I just want to ask if you can answer very quickly. We know that on Monday, the president deployed the army onto the streets ahead of the polls next week amid pockets of violence. Has this helped in ensuring peace in the country ahead of the polls?
From the time that the army were deployed in the main city, that's Lusaka city, just driving into town this morning and part of afternoon, yes, you could see that there were some men in uniform patrolling around the city, not from the side or not from this part of the country. We haven't reported any cases of violence. And just today as well, over 1,000 police officers, new recruits, have been distributed to help with the election management. So we're seeing that violence that has been reported in the past few days won't be the case. But there are some reports, few cases here and there where the political parties are using provocation as an excuse to undertake physical confrontation, but not as much as it was reported in the last few weeks.
All right, then, Alexander, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed.
All right, thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Still to come on the program. Former South African President Jacob Zuma to be allowed out of prison to appear in person at corruption trial. That's in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. In North Africa, President Kais Saied has fired Tunisia's ambassador to the United States and the governor of a key province. The latest dismissal since he provoked a political crisis last month when he assumed all executive power. In a series of shock moves on July the 25th, President Saied fired the Prime Minister and suspended Parliament for 30 days. He also began ruling by decree, went on to dismiss several officials and announced a crackdown against corruption. Well, amid the country's economic crisis, residents hope for better times ahead. As day breaks over Tunis, single mother Jamila Gouli takes her two small children out into the streets to scavenge in waste bins for plastic bottles that she sells to buy food for her family. The 55-year-old gathers a few kilograms of dirt-covered plastic each day. The proceeds from selling the plastic, combined with limited financial assistance from the government, amount to $69 a month, around half her monthly rent. Hamza Ayari, who buys the bottles and resells them to factories, says many people are doing the same.
I buy plastic bottles from collectors. There are lots of people that come here to sell the bottles they collect because they don't have a job. They are poor. So I buy the plastic from them and sell it to the factory.
Exacerbated by the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, economic grievances have fueled discontent in Tunisia, leading to protests that encouraged President Kais Saied to remove the Prime Minister and assume governing authority last month. Desperate for better lives, some residents here are hopeful about President Saied's move, even though major parties in parliament have decried it as a coup and a threat to Tunisia's democracy.
This was a surprise for us, the Tunisian people. We were worried. Every morning when we would get up, we didn't understand anything. We couldn't see where we were going. But there's a bit of hope now.
President Saied, who was elected in 2019, says he will not become a dictator and that the actions he took on July the 25th, including the 30-day suspension of parliament, were constitutional, but he has yet to set out his next steps. And now in sad news, 41 people have been killed in a road accident in south-central Mali after a truck carrying goods and market workers collided with a passenger bus. The country's transport ministry says the truck's driver lost control after a tire burst and the vehicle swerved into the path of the bus. The force of the crash, which happened 20 kilometers from the town of Ségou, shed off the front section of the bus. A further 33 people were injured in the collision. According to the World Health Organization, Africa has by far the world's most dangerous roads, registering over 26 deaths by 100,000 population. And some updates from the COVID-19 pandemic now. Cote d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara is in self-isolation after being in contact with someone
who were tested positive for COVID-19. The name of the person has not been released. President Ouattara has encouraged the population to get vaccinated while observing the health measures put in place to fight the disease. If the president's isolation is prolonged, he might not take part in the official Independence Day ceremony on August the 7th. According to a 3-year analysis, more than 700 healthcare workers and patients have died since December 2017, and more than 2,000 have been injured in attacks on health facilities. The surveillance system for attacks on healthcare from 2018 to 2020 recorded data from 17 emergency-affected countries and fragile settings. These included Ethiopia, Yemen, Syria, Mozambique, Nigeria, occupied Palestinian territories, Myanmar, Central African Republic, and Somalia.
Since 2017, the initial rollout of the system, over 2,700 incidents have been reported in 17 countries and territories. In particular, 700 healthcare workers and patients have died, and more than 200 have been injured. This 3-year analysis illustrates that 1 out of 6 incidents have led to a patient or healthcare worker's loss of life in 2020. The analysis further demonstrates that healthcare workers are most vulnerable and most affected. Healthcare workers impacted in this study represents 2/3 of all attacks in 2018 and 2019, and 50% of all recorded incidents in 2020. And this is compared to some of the other variables of attacks on the system, which includes the medical supplies, the medical assets, and the facility itself. In 2021, to date, 588 incidents of attacks on healthcare have been recorded within 14 countries that are currently impacted by security and emergencies. This too has caused 114 deaths and 278 injuries of healthcare workers and patients.
Nova in South Africa, former President Jacob Zuma will be allowed out of prison on Tuesday next week to appear in person at a corruption trial. The court's decision comes weeks after more than 300 people were killed during rioting that was sparked by Zuma's arrest for contempt of court in a separate case. A heavy security presence is highly likely as Zuma's supporters are expected to gather at the corruption trial in Pietermaritzburg, a city devastated by riots and looting sparked by his arrest. This will be the second time Mr. Zuma will appear in public since he was taken into custody last month. He was also allowed out briefly last week to attend his brother's funeral. And finally, on the program, having filed for a local form of bankruptcy protection in January, South Africa-based Kinneker is hoping that drive-in cinemas will lure back customers after more than a year of lockdown restrictions. Take a look.
The drive-in movie is more than just a novelty experience as it used to be. Viewing from within their cars provide the social distance required since the pandemic. Ster-Kenco, Africa's largest cinema group, is betting on the format to win back customers fearful of catching the coronavirus.
Instead of watching a movie at home, especially with Corona, we haven't really gone to cinemas in general. This is a nice option away from just watching a movie at home.
Moviegoers who came to try out the drive-in say it's a heady mix of nostalgia and freedom. It also offers a protective personal bubble and a new style of cozy relaxation.
I was so excited on the way here. I was absolutely thrilled because the last time I went to a drive-in, I was like 3, so I can barely remember it. And I'm so thrilled that I could do this because especially in COVID, it's so much better now compared to the normal cinemas because, yeah, it's getting hectic.
Those are encouraging words for the cinema group, which filed for business rescue, a local form of bankruptcy protection, in January because of losses related to lockdown restrictions.
The big goal for us is to keep the industry alive. There's nothing worse. I mean, in South Africa, you have consumers come to the cinema on average, believe it or not, 3 times, maximum 3 times a year. That's on average. Now, we've had we've been under lockdown for 15 months, or at least some shape or form of lockdown for the last 15 to 16 months. The fear there is that if you don't come to the cinema, or if you don't watch a movie on the big screen for a prolonged, protruded length of time, you may never come back. You'll find alternative entertainment.
Like it appears, the Kenko was forced to close from the end of March until the end of August 2020. Since August, it's operated under curfews and with limitations on gatherings.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shoboale. Bye for now.